Before we get into the heavy hitting of Children's Mental Health Week, let's have a quick village meeting. Look, we moved to the Netherlands for the work-life balance and maybe the bicycles, but let's be real. Trying to raise a family in a foreign country while deciphering a letter for the Belastingdienst, that's a special form of mental gymnastics. This podcast is here because we know it takes a village, but sometimes that village can be 5,000 miles away or in the next country, and while your only local friend could be a very judgmental heron in the park. We're here to support the community of brave, slightly cold international families. So if the show has ever been the emotional raincoat you needed during a literal Dutch downpour, or if it's just made you feel less alone in the Albert Heijn aisle, do me a favor. Subscribe, rate, review. Seriously, just hit the button. It's easier than trying to find a Huisarts who actually wants to see you. And it helps other international families find us before they reach for the third bitter ballon of despair. Share it with your community. Let's keep each other sane. Now, let's talk about those kids. Welcome back to the Damn Parenting Podcast. I am your host Eva and I'm so glad you're here. This episode is coming out ahead of Children's Mental Health Week, which runs from February 9th to the 15th, and this year's theme is "This is my place." Now, that phrase feels especially meaningful for the families listening here. Many of us are raising children who are growing up between cultures, languages, and places. Children who are learning how to belong while the ground beneath them is still shifting. And for our third culture kids, the question of place isn't just about geography. It's about emotional safety. It's about knowing where they are understood, where they are held, and where they can make sense of the world. In last week's episode with Mimi, we explored how emotional language becomes a safety tool, how naming feelings in whatever language works for your family gives children an internal map that they can carry with them, wherever they are. And today's conversation builds gently on that. When we talk about children's mental health, it often is framed as something to worry about. It's something to monitor or something to fix. But this episode, it's not about fear. It's about creating spaces in our homes, our relationships, and even in conversations like this, where children feel safe enough to grow. If you're listening to episodes like these, it's already telling us something important. It tells us you care. It tells us you're open to learning. It tells us you're willing to reflect. Not because you're failing, but because you know parenting is something we do together. This is a space to exhale, a space to feel reassured, and a space to remember that learning from one another, sharing knowledge, and coming together safely is one of the most powerful things we can do for ourselves and for our children. And I will admit, truthfully, I am continually wondering if I'm doing enough, if I'm missing something, if I already should know more. And I know I'm not alone in that. Parenting, especially when you're not from this country, has a way of quietly asking us to be experts in things no one ever taught us and in another language. Children's mental health is one of those areas. So if this conversation brings up questions or reflections or even a little discomfort, it doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're engaged and it means you care. Stigma thrives in silence, and it softens when we speak openly and listen carefully and allow ourselves to keep learning. I'm joined today by our resident child psychologist, Dr. Faye Poole, to explore children's mental health through the lens of relationship, regulation, and protection, especially for the families raising children far from where they began. And with that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Faye Poole back. Hi, Faye.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us on such a very important period of the year when we're going to be focusing on children's mental health. Faye, when parents actually hear children's mental health, many immediately are thinking of anxiety or diagnosis or something being wrong. Can you actually help us reframe what children's mental health actually is, especially when we look at babies and young children?
I wonder whether it's helpful to start with a definition of mental health. I came across one by the NSPCC that describes mental health as an individual's cognitive, behavioural and emotional well-being. And it's something we all have, including every baby, child and young person. I know for me personally, I often use emotional well-being as well as a term that kind of fits nicely with mental health, especially when talking about children. And I guess when thinking about what mental health is, it's important for us to think about why supporting children's mental health is so important. And really, as parents, it should be central to everything that we do. The mental health of our children is so closely linked to so many areas of your children's life, including social relationships, learning, development, and also physical well-being. So it's incredibly important for us as parents to think about how we can support their emotional well-being, their mental health, as much as we possibly can. can. Just in terms of kind of unpicking one of those a little bit as a bit of an example, I wondered whether it'd be helpful to think about how mental health perhaps ties into supporting learning and development, for example, for children. When children are feeling quite stressed, when children are feeling quite anxious, when they're feeling emotionally dysregulated, children find it really, really difficult to be able to access learning, to be able to develop as much as they possibly could. Thinking about like when we feel emotionally healthy and we feel in a positive headspace to allow us to be open to learning and growth. But when children experience challenges with emotional well-being, this can significantly impact their higher order thinking, their ability to access learning and effectively lay down new memories, which can all have a negative impact on educational attainment and their general development over time.
That's a mouthful. For many international families who are living with ongoing low level stress, so for example, relocation or finding a new house with uncertainty, identity shifts, I guess, and definitely the lack of family support, we often don't talk about how stress shows up physically in children. Can you explain what actually happens in a child's body under prolonged stress and why this makes everyday connections such a powerful protective factor?
Absolutely. So when we experience stress over a prolonged period of time, we end up experiencing high levels of cortisol in the body. And high levels of cortisol over a long period of time can then have a huge impact on our physical health. And one way that it can really impact us is in terms of our immune system. So it can really compromise and reduce the effectiveness of our immune system over time. We know that a little bit of cortisol in short bursts can actually be quite good for us. It can very much enhance our performance in certain situations, but actually over a much more prolonged period of time, it can have quite a detrimental impact on our physical health. When thinking about how stress can impact our immune system, it can have a huge impact on aggravating our digestion. It can cause issues with nausea, constipation, and diarrhea. And it can also heavily impact our immune system in terms of being able to prevent us developing things like coughs and colds because our immune system becomes quite compromised. So, particularly when thinking about kind of more low level ways that stress can impact our physical health, they're definitely things that we should take into consideration. If you want to kind of have a look at more bigger sources of stress over time, we've actually found that high levels of stress over a prolonged period of time linked to big significant life events can also have a negative impact on physical health over a longer term going into adulthood. So there's a piece of research that looks into something called adverse childhood experiences, and it looks at specifically 10 events that may happen in a child's life that are incredibly stressful for them. Then it looks at the longer term health implications of that moving into adulthood. So, for example, thinking about adverse childhood experiences, the examples of them might be domestic violence in the home. It could be parental mental health challenges, parental drug taking. It might also be a parent in prison, for example. There's 10 in total, but they're examples of a couple.
Okay, so this is adverse childhood experience. It can kind of sound frightening, I guess, for many people out there who might be hearing it for the first time. Can you actually explain to us just a little more about these in a way that informs, I guess, rather than overwhelms, and what can genuinely help a child in this situation?
So, research has found that when we look at adverse childhood experiences, the more ACEs experienced, the more likely a child is to experience toxic stress and poor health outcomes in the future. And these experiences trigger an excessive and long lasting stress response, which can have a wear and tear effect on the body. It's a bit like revving an engine for days or weeks at a time. It's naturally going to have that wear and tear effect on your engine, and it can also change the architecture of the brain as well. So, thinking about ACEs and the more ACEs experienced, they've actually been linked to lowering life expectancy, cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and respiratory diseases as well. But I think something to be kind of really mindful of is that it's not a complete cause and effect relationship. And we know that when significant and prolonged amounts of stress are put on the body, there are things that we can do as a buffer to support children in going through these situations. So, for example, a parent and child's relationship is incredibly important in acting as a buffer, especially around connection, to very much support resilience in children, to help them to overcome and develop coping strategies to manage some of those high levels of stress as children.
So ACEs are quite an important element that are actually quite good to be aware of. What are some key messages you would give parents to provide supporting children's mental health and well-being?
One of the most important things I would highlight in supporting a child's well-being is having safe, secure, and nurturing relationships with adults that they're able to rely on. This helps to serve as a really, really key resilience factor and protective factor in buffering against things like high levels of stress and also wider challenges that they face in life. So I know we've talked about ACEs, which is a more extreme form of stress, but actually other forms of stress that children experience also really, really benefit from those nurturing relationships and being able to fall back on adults when they really need to as a really key source of support. And we also know that spending time with children, connecting with them, is also incredibly important and fundamental in supporting their emotional well-being. And I think we'll unpick a couple of ways we can do that in a little bit. And I guess the final point I would highlight is to reach their full potential, children need to feel safe and nurtured. They also need to be allowed to express their emotions in a way that they can feel seen and responded to, and they need to be supported in a caring and responsive way. Understanding your child's emotions and behaviours and knowing how to support them makes such a positive difference to their development, especially around their learning, their relationships, and their mental health.
As you said, could you give us some of those tips then to support parents to help them connect with the children and support their mental health?
Yeah, so what I've brought with me is 5 tips that I feel are important to support children's mental health and their emotional well-being. And the first one I know we've mentioned a couple of times before in previous episodes, but I can't stress it enough as such a powerful tool to support connection and to support children in their emotional well-being. So the concept is to really maximize connection time with your child, even if it's 10 to 15 minutes a day. Now, this is based on an idea that Joanna Fortune talks about, and it looks at providing 10 to 15 minutes of undisturbed one-to-one connection time away from absolutely anything else, away from your phone, away from the TV, away from other children, and really being in the moment and allowing your child to take the lead in an interaction, whether it be play, whether it be reading a book. If you think about older children, maybe tapping into something that they're really interested in, but really focusing your attention on them for 10 to 15 minutes and engaging in really quality connection time. Another one that I've come across as well that I really like the idea of, and it was developed by Kate Silverton, with Hero Hour. She talks about how it's really important to have an hour each week, one-to-one time with your child, where again you engage in an activity together that's completely undisturbed and allows you to really connect. Now you're probably wondering what the benefits are to this, and research has found that when you provide this connection time daily and weekly, it really helps to support your connection, attunement, and unique bond with your child. Also, it often helps to support their cognitive development, their general emotional well-being, because let's be honest, it helps to fill up their emotional cup. It can also have positive effects on their confidence and self-esteem, and also their sense of self, feeling valued and listened to. And one of the most important things is it fosters open communication. So it might actually open up avenues to talk about other things that the child or young person might have found really difficult to talk about in a normal everyday situation. So providing that space might actually open up wider conversations that fosters open communication and again ties into developing your connection with your child. So that's number one. So number two that I think is incredibly important is validating your child's emotions and being openly curious about what they are feeling in a non-judgmental way. So you might have heard the term kind of name it to tame it. What that refers to is naming the child or young person's emotions allows them to add words to the emotions that they are experiencing and helps to develop their emotional vocabulary, which is something I'm going to touch on in the next tip. But the more we're able to provide language to the emotions that children are experiencing, the better they're able to express them. Whereas if they don't necessarily have the language to express how they're feeling, then that may come out physically or behaviorally in a different way because they're not able to tell others how they're feeling. In terms of validating your child's emotions, something else you could also do is talk about your own emotions too, because when we talk about emotions in a normal way and we talk about them in a sense that we all feel emotions are normal, it helps children to feel less isolated and it helps them to see that their emotions don't necessarily have to be so big and overwhelming. So really the aim of this is to support children in feeling less alone in the big emotions they experience, and it helps to support them in understanding the emotions that they are feeling. So tip number 3 is just supporting your child's emotional awareness in general. So I think it's really important to help them to understand the emotions that they're experiencing, and I know I kind of touched on this in the previous tip that we were just talking about, supporting them to learn about their emotions and how different emotions feel in their body. So this could include things like naming their emotions as you see them, providing them with language to express themselves. Another one could be expanding their emotional vocabulary, supporting them to notice how different emotions feel in their body. The more they're able to identify physiologically how emotions feel in the body, the more they're able to understand, oh, actually, that feeling might mean I'm feeling a little bit anxious right now, or that feeling might help me to see that I'm feeling a little bit angry right now. The more they're able to identify those sensations in the body, the more they're able to then understand, oh, actually, that sensation means that I am feeling anxious, or that sensation means that I am feeling angry. And it might be about supporting them to understand when they're starting to bubble. So that when they're starting to bubble and become anxious, what little sensations and indications in their body indicate that they're feeling that way. And also when they're out of control, how does that feel? So supporting them to really recognize when they're feeling those emotions at the time. Another area I would focus on is helping them to identify triggers of big emotions. So what are the key triggers that they experience? Is it certain people? Is it certain places? Is it certain activities that perhaps cause them to feel maybe anxious or angry in certain situations? But the more they're able to recognize those triggers, the more they're able to perhaps put strategies in place or to change the situation, or we're able to change the situation somewhat to reduce those big triggers. And then the last one that I think is really important is supporting them to develop an emotional toolbox of strategies to manage big emotions. Now, I'm not going to give you any specific examples here just purely because what works for one child is completely different to what works for another child, but it's about finding certain strategies that help to support your child in managing those big emotions. So tip number 4 is being mindful of the language we use to describe our children. Now, the words that we use to describe them becomes their inner voice and their monologue. So if we're using negative words to describe them constantly, such as naughty or defiant, they will come to believe those words to be true. And then it may essentially become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And they may then start to act out as naughty because they think, well, do you know what? Everyone thinks I'm naughty anyway. So why would I behave any differently? So instead of using negative words, how can we use more positive ones instead? An idea I've come across that I absolutely love is making sure that children can overhear you saying positive things about them. Because let's be honest, everyone likes hearing positive things about them, but children in particular. So how can you kind of set up situations where they get to hear all the lovely things you have to say about them? Like, for example, telling a teddy bear how kind they've been today. Or I really like, as a bit of a debrief, if I've had a full day with my little boy and then my husband gets him from work, I will intentionally say some really nice things about him to my husband, just to kind of say, oh, my little boy has had a really good day today. He was really kind to whoever, or he was really thoughtful. But I usually bring up really nice things about him to help him to see himself in a positive light. But also, it gives him a little confidence boost. Yeah, it helps to promote those positive emotions for him. So yeah, I really like that strategy. And then I think the last one, number 5, is quite a straightforward one, but it's actually still a really important one that I think needs mentioning. And it's creating family routines to support mental health. Now, we know that routines and predictability help children feel safe, secure, and connected. And family routines help to support all of us, not just children. They're good for everyone's well-being. They help every member of the family to get things done. They hopefully, the majority of the time, reduce stress levels, and they help to find time to connect and have fun together. And we know that usually children cope best when they're following consistent routines, when there's order, when they know what to expect. So, for example, when they get in from school or when they get in from daycare, they know that it's perhaps playtime, then dinner time, then bath time, stories, and bedtime. And following that consistent routine each day as much as we possibly can, because I know every day we can't do that, but the more that we can do that, it helps to provide consistency during times of uncertainty. So particularly when changes happen, perhaps unexpected changes or upcoming changes that we know are coming, the more we're able to provide routine and consistency in those moments, the more we're able to support children in feeling safe, support children in feeling calm in and amongst those wider changes that can be quite stressful at times. Also, something that's quite nice and I think is worth the mention is when you have older children, working with them to maybe develop routines or develop certain things that could be important throughout the day or throughout the week. So I really love the idea of putting in a Friday movie night and pizza. And I think even though it's not necessarily connection like I spoke about earlier, it's still a really lovely family moment where every Friday that's what you expect. And yeah, I just think it's a really nice routine for them to put in. And that might be something that they suggest, or they might suggest something different. But involving them in that planning of the routine can be quite powerful, and it helps them to buy in to those routines as well. The only other thing I should probably mention about routines, and for a lot of children, routines are important. And when routines change, I would also try and give children warnings as much as you possibly can around that change. Any kind of prior warning, again, can help them in feeling more settled and can help them in feeling safe in those times of uncertainty.
I feel that one. So for parents listening, which could take just maybe a thing or two away from this, because it's quite a lot, I'm sure, but it's a very informative and very supportive episode that we really want to provide. Are there any questions that we can pose to the parents to get them to think about their place in this?
I guess a couple of key questions we could think about are, how would you describe your relationship with your child? How do you think they would describe their relationship with you? And what do you think they would say the best part is? When do you feel most connected with them? When do you think they feel most connected to you? If there's been times where you felt disconnected, what helped bring you closer again? And the final one you might want to think about is, what is something you think your child would like to do together with you?
So that's a pause for thought. Dr. Faye, thank you so much for coming on here to raise awareness, I guess, especially for children's mental health, as it's not something a lot of us have in the front of our minds a lot, as we're struggling with reparenting ourselves mainly and just trying to survive the day. So thank you, Dr. Faye.
Thank you.
As we come to the end of this conversation, I want to remind you of something important. You don't have to hold all of this in your head. You don't have to remember every insight or strategy. We have enough going on in our heads as parents. We're going to include practical reminders, resources, and places to find support in our show notes. We'll include practical reminders, resources, and places to find support in the show notes, and we'll also be sharing gentle prompts and suggestions over on the Instagram page, so you can return to them when you need them and in your own time. And maybe, most importantly, no one is meant to raise a family alone. Parenting, especially when we're not in our home country, it was never supposed to be a solo effort. It was always meant to be held by a village. And conversations like this, shared learning, and safe spaces where we can reflect together are part of how we build that village. Quietly, imperfectly, but meaningfully. If you're here, you're already part of it. Thank you for listening.